You fool! Warren is dead.
Part 12. The Gaping Maw. In the shadowy lair of Cecelia Davenport, 5 pairs of lungs tried to breathe without making sound. 5 sets of eyes refused to blink, as if blinking might attract attention. Betsy could hear the faintest drip of water somewhere within the walls. She could hear Rose's teeth clicking together uncontrollably. She didn't know how long they waited. Seconds became minutes. Minutes became something else. Alice's hand found Betsy's sleeve in the darkness and squeezed. Brandon's breathing came in soft, quick bursts, like an animal in a cage. Alan, for once in his life, had been completely stripped of bravado. And then Betsy felt it, the strangest sensation. The mound was still, the cellar dead, but something had shifted within the burrow. Something was aware. Betsy's stomach tightened. Its belly is never full. She pressed a palm to the cold stone wall to steady herself. There was a sound, something wet and slick forcing itself through something tight and smooth. Alice's eyes widened. She mouthed, "What do we do?" Betsy didn't answer, because she didn't know. The plan, such as it was, had been stitched together from fear and fragments. The Quaker's riddles, the lighter in Rose's pocket. Fire burns its belly. The mound shuddered. But this time it wasn't settling. It was rising. A seam of bin bags split open with a quiet tearing sound. Something moved, and the heat that had been radiating from it seemed to increase, as though the nest were a furnace being stoked from the inside. The stench intensified, worse than before. Sweet rot, rancid waste, the faint metallic tang of blood. Rose heaved. She was close to throwing up. Betsy clamped her hand over her friend's mouth, felt tears wet her fingers. The mound opened, like a body bag unzipped from within. And then Cecelia Davenport emerged. A mass of black material and bulging sacks, the crude dress stretched to the point of indecency, stitches strained like ligaments. Its hands were swollen further, fingers thick, blunt, menacing. The pale mask that had once resembled a face was gone, revealing the horrifying visage beneath. A lump, a growth of some sort, sniffing with a nose that wasn't there, listening with ears that were entirely absent. And the lump began to expand, growing larger by the second, stretching, widening, with one essential feature, a great, gaping mouth, a wet black crescent revealing massive, shark-like teeth. "What?" it rumbled, the sound coming from somewhere other than the colossal cavern of daggers, a nightmare vibration delivered straight to the bones. "What's in the bag?" Brandon flinched so hard, his shoulder knocked the wall. The creature's head snapped towards the recess. Betsy's heart stopped. For a second, nothing happened. The creature stood there, enormous, swaying slightly. Then it moved. The floor trembled beneath its bulk. Bin bags rustled against each other. Something inside the dress shifted like a sack of live insects. Betsy's mind fired through possibilities in frantic flashes. Run, stairs, door, kitchen. But there was a major problem. The creature hovered between them and the stairs. Rose's eyes rolled back for a moment, as if she might faint. Alan's face was grey. Betsy felt her own fear trying to override her limbs, trying to press her down to the floor. She fought it the way her dad fought tiredness, by forcing himself to overcome it, climbing to his feet, doing what needed to be done. She leaned close to the others, lips near Alice's ear. "You have to run, all of you," she breathed. "I'll distract her. Go on, head for the stairs." Alice nodded, trembling. She was in no fit state to negotiate. She motioned towards the others, hinted at the stairs. When the time came, they would know what to do. Betsy waited for the creature to move again, an instinctive balancing act. Then she darted out into the open. The others darted too, surged out of the recess and sprinted for the stairs in a dense, stumbling cluster. Their shoes slapped stone. Their breath burst out of them. Someone rose, made a strangled sound that might have been a sob. The creature bellowed, its attention torn between the fleeing mass and the lone girl standing at what had once passed for its feet. But it thought for only a nanosecond. The massive body lunged after the stumbling cluster with surprising speed, hands slamming against the floor, dragging, hauling. Alan pushed Brandon. Brandon grabbed Rose. Alice clutched at the damp steps. Behind them, the thing closed in, a giant, vibrating mass of intent. Betsy saw with sudden cold clarity how easily the creature could pull them back down. "Hey!" she yelled, giving it everything she had. "It's me you want. Hey, I'm right here." And the bag lady stopped. Its huge, awkward frame ceased to move altogether. The fleeing kid stopped too, for, standing at the top of the cellar stairs, silhouetted against the faint light of the kitchen, was a man in a dark suit. Betsy recognized him instantly. The Quaker, clutching a small cloth bag, raised his head slightly and spoke. "Calm," he said, his voice soft and steady. "Calm," he repeated, as though addressing both the children on the stairs and the monster suspended in their midst. "What's in the bag?" the creature gurgled, a truly horrible sound to hear. The Quaker began to descend the stairs, repeating the word, "calm." Betsy expected him to pull the children past him, to steer them out, but he didn't. He passed them on the stairs, and all present saw the look of weary resignation on his face. The creature's cavernous mouth opened again, wider than ever. Betsy saw strings of saliva stretch and snap between teeth, saw the dark throat beyond. The Quaker came within striking distance of the thing. Slowly and somewhat clumsily, he extracted an object from the cloth bag. It was a curious item, a small, flame-coloured sphere. Betsy saw a large, glowing marble, but she knew it was something else entirely. It commanded her attention. "Calm," the Quaker said again, and as he did so, he raised the sphere in front of him. The creature seemed to cower, recoiled slightly, as though in response to some distant memory, a half-forgotten recollection of danger. Then, without warning, the Quaker launched himself at Cecelia Davenport. For a moment it looked ridiculous, an old, exhausted man throwing himself at a monster twice his size. But the monster reeled backwards, bellowing, bloated hands flailing, trying to pry him and the strange object he held off. But the Quaker clung on like a leech, forcing the thing in the direction of the mound. The creature shrieked, an inhuman sound, muffled and distorted by the fact that something was attached to it. The cellar became a storm of rustling plastic, tearing fabric, cracking bone. The mound shuddered behind them, responding as though it were part of the thing's nervous system. Alice stared, paralyzed. Brandon shook his head violently, as if trying to shake the image loose from his mind. Betsy didn't have time to wonder. Both the Quaker and Cecelia Davenport were swallowed by the burrow, yanked inside like crumbs sucked into a vacuum cleaner. Alien sounds permeated the cellar, noises the 5 children could neither describe nor understand. The mound, burrow, or nest seemed to collapse in on itself, like a balloon popped with a needle. In the cavity left behind, Betsy saw an open void, stars littering a bottomless expanse. An object, in the shape of the thrashing bag lady, drifted towards the tiny pinpoints of light like a dead ship lost in space. The others joined Betsy, staring into the ether with wide, incredulous eyes. Rose whimpered. Tears streamed down Alan's face. It was both wondrous and monstrous, depending on whether one focused on the wider panorama or the hellish shape writhing at the centre of it. Betsy thought of Market Street, thought of the poor woman being lifted like a doll, thought of the laundrette drums. Mindlessly, she eyed the remnants of rubbish strewn about the edges of the hole, pulled the lighter from her pocket, rolled the wheel, lit a sheet of yellow newspaper at her feet. And up it went, a basement bonfire, flames that consumed not only the fragments of remaining rubbish, but also the strange portal that had opened up before her. And a portal it had been, an exit from the ordinary world of Lowther, with its terraced houses and knobbly roadside trees, and a door onto something older, colder, and unimaginably distant. Whatever had worn the body of Cecelia Davenport had returned to its point of origin, a fact Stephen Carr would only piece together later, after weeks of uneasy reading and half-answered questions. He learned what he could from reluctant Quakers in forgotten meeting houses, men who spoke in fragments and euphemisms, and referred to the thing only as the material. It was not of this world. It had arrived long before humanity had learned to stand upright, and there were whispers, never confirmed, that it had nudged our species along its crooked path. It needed to return again and again to whatever distant place it called home, and the nauseous nests it built served as a means of passage. Imprisonment prevented its coming and going, spared mankind its insatiable alien hunger, a hunger that was intrinsic to its nature, that had intensified over the long centuries. But that was as far as Steve ever managed to go, ever wanted to go. He and his daughter were more than happy to wash their hands of the subject. Betsy and her friends stood in the glow of the blaze in Cecelia Davenport's cellar, watching as the flames devoured the portal like starving mouths. It was over in seconds. When the fire finally collapsed in on itself, all that remained was a shallow hollow, breathing out thin smoke and strewn with warm, grey ash. The bewildered children fled. They sprinted down the back street, launched themselves through the ginnel between 46 and 47, and dropped like stones onto the comfortable, if a little chilly, grass of Buckingham Street. Betsy's fingers closed around Rose's lighter in her pocket, the cheap disposable, the tiny wheel. 5 heads turned towards number 44, faces flushed in the winter dusk. From the outside, it was still absurdly neat, respectable, nothing to hint at the madness that had festered below its cool exterior. "What now?" Brandon managed, still panting. Alan and Rose stared at him, faces blank. Alice shrugged her shoulders. Betsy, though, her eyes a little brighter than the others, said, "We go home." She smiled as she said it. Relief immediately washed over the faces of her friends. "What a weird few days," Rose mumbled. Alan chuckled at that, but it was a surface laugh only. Deep down he was troubled. They all were. But there'd be time to process everything later, much later, when the grown-ups had done whatever was necessary to tidy up the loose ends, to put the kids' minds at ease, to make sure everything went back to normal. Later, in the quiet living room of number 22, Betsy sat beside her dad on the sofa. The house shook faintly with distant activity outside. The thrum of engines, shouted instructions, blue light flickering through the curtains. The authorities were busy out there, and yet Betsy wasn't in the least worried about any of it coming back to her. Steve's arm was around her shoulders. His face was grey, eyes fixed on nothing. Betsy told him everything. The plain truth, in the only order she could manage. The mound, the Quaker, the underground space, the cheap lighter. Steve listened to the whole tale. When she finished, he looked down at her. In the light of the television, she seemed smaller again, 9 years old, exhausted, A child whose primary concerns were supposed to be homework and playing out. She'd been through so much already, and here she was again, face to face with something beyond her comprehension. Betsy leaned into his side, eyes fixed on the curtain where the blue lights pulsed like distant lightning. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in the place where dreams waited, Betsy wondered whether fire truly burned in the belly of the bodiless, or whether hunger, given time, would permit the bodiless to return.